Hi, all. I see we've had a few more people join. We're just going to give people one more minute to get started. If you're in the Denver metro like I am, you can listen to the sounds of the thunder in the background. And if you're on the western slope, we'll be sending you lots of good thoughts for rain and moisture. So we'll just get started in one more minute. While we're waiting, I see one person has put their name in the chat. If anyone else would like to introduce themselves, tell us who you are and where you're coming from, feel free to put your name in the chat. And I have that at 6:35, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thanks for being here and joining us. This is the Urban Ag and Colorado Water panel. We have a fantastic group of panelists who are going to talk with us today about urban agriculture and water. We're going to cover some of the water challenges urban producers have, how the state is working on water, and how urban producers can engage in that work. My name is Erin Foster-West. I'm the Western Campaigns Director for the National Young Farmers Coalition, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today. This panel is the second in a two-part teach-in series we've held on water and equity. These have been hosted by a new water and equity partnership. This is a collaboration of National Young Farmers Coalition and FrontLine Farming with the goal of creating more equitable water governance for agriculture and to elevate the voices and interests of groups that have historically been left out of water planning, like BIPOC farmers and ranchers, young farmers, and urban producers. So we have Fatima Ahmad here today and others from Frontline Farming that have been a part of the partnership, and Willow Cousins, who's been coordinating the project and providing a lot of support for the teach-ins and to make this panel happen today. So through the partnership, Frontline Farming and Young Farmers, we are working to provide education and opportunities for BIPOC producers and allies to engage at the state level on water issues. And we're starting by offering these water and equity panels to get that discussion started. The first teach-in that we held was a bit broader, and we covered a number of issues on water and equity. That recording is going to be available on the website. We'll share that towards the end of the panel. But today we're going to be zooming in a little bit on just one sector, one group that isn't discussed much in water planning, and that is urban agriculture. So we have three great panelists here today. They're going to be talking about the role urban agriculture plays in state water, the resources that are available to urban producers, and some of the issues that are really unique to urban ag and water. So maybe before I start the panel, I'll just pause and see if Fatima or Willow want to add anything about the partnership before we jump in.
No, thank you, Erin. Just welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight.
All right, cool, great. Well, thanks so much to you two for being an integral part of this partnership and making the panel happen. So we've got a great panelist today. We have Alex Funk from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We have Commissioner Kate Greenberg from the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And we have Amanda Weaver from Five Bridges Farm. So just to tell you kind of how this panel is going to work today, each panelist is going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we'll have 5 minutes after each panelist for questions that are specific to the issues that they talked about. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and then make sure we get to those questions in that 5 minutes after each speaker. We'll also have some time at the very end after all the speakers have presented to have some more dialogue across the issues that they've presented. So keep putting your questions in the chat and I'll get to those. If we don't get those in the 5 minutes after each speaker, we'll get to them at the very end. So we'll go ahead and get started. Alex Funk from CWCB is gonna kick us off. He is the Agriculture and Rural Resiliency Policy Specialist at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So Alex, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Erin. I'm gonna take a second here and share my screen. One second here. While I'm kind of pulling that up, yeah, thanks again for having me here tonight. Really excited to be here to talk about urban agriculture. And the potential to highlight urban agriculture in the update to the Colorado Water Plan. So if you've never heard of the Colorado Water Conservation Board before, we are a state agency within the Department of Natural Resources. Our primary role is to serve as the state's lead water policy and planning agency, and so we represent Coloradans on interstate and federal water matters, and then work to support water planning and projects on the ground as well. Just a quick plug. We do offer a number of financial programs to support everything from infrastructure projects to educational programs to outreach work. We offer a number of grant programs, and so I definitely encourage you, if you are kind of interested in the water space, to definitely check out our grant website for more information about that. And you always happy to chat about any project ideas. And that's really a good segue for sort of kind of how we discuss some of those funding priorities and how the state really plans around water issues. So I won't go through all these, but just a quick history in that water policy and planning, prior to the early aughts, there was no state water plan. The state didn't really have any sort of roadmap or framework for decision making around water issues. And then we had a really bad drought in 2002. I think it remains the worst on record, although I feel like parts of the state are, I think maybe exceeding that this year, particularly on the western slope. But long story short, that drought in 2002 really prompted a discussion on sort of this need to kind of better understand our water resources, sort of look at current supply, future demands, and kind of start thinking about how we plan for those in a way that sort of reflects these sort of all the uses of water that we have across the state. So everything from agriculture to the municipal use to recreation and environment. And so that kind of get launched underway. I'll just note kind of some of the key dates here. So 2005, there was legislation that created what we call the Basin Roundtables. These are 9 regional forums that kind of serve as basically local regional networks to connect on water issues. I'll touch more about them in a little bit. So that created Basin Roundtables, and then in 2015, we released the first state water plan. And if you've never read the water plan, it's about 700 pages. It can be a little intimidating, but in short, I mean, I think the goal of the plan was to really kind of provide this framework to respond to different water challenges. I would say some of the more important purposes and why it's important to kind of get engaged on the water planning process is that the plan really helps direct our funding and policy priority setting, and not just within our agency, but really statewide. So this state plan, it has buy-in from multiple state agencies and partners, and it really covers just a huge swath of issues, everything from soil health to watershed health to forest management to adaptation to climate change. So it covers a wide range of issues, although I'll note that thanks to the research to Willow and others, that it does not talk about urban agriculture, and does not talk to a great extent about acequias or sort of other historically underrepresented communities. And so I think there's a real opportunity with this update to address that and to really highlight some of the unique challenges, water resource challenges affecting sort of the broader range of agriculture in Colorado. And that's really what's happening now. So in 2019, we sort of launched this process overcoming sort of the update to the water plan. It is a living document sort of designed to respond to emerging issues, to sort of look at what we've accomplished and sort of update that to reflect what we need to kind of like continue to work on. So that process got underway in 2019 and is continuing this year and into next. And really sort of the 2 key sort of planning processes that are happening are each of those basin roundtables are individually updating their own regional plans. And that's really important because, what ends up in those planning, those basin level plans also influences what the roundtables engage on and some of the projects that they fund. And then sort of parallel to that and kind of building on that is the update to the state plan itself. And with a little more detail there's sort of 3 key phases that are kind of happening with that process. We just wrapped up what we called our scoping phase. This was sort of a 6-month process where we held a series of stakeholder sessions on a number of different topics. For agriculture, we held about 7 of these. I'll talk about more of that in a second. But essentially, we solicited a lot of public feedback on sort of what the public really wanted to see in the plan. Really what were the priority issues? What are some sort of emerging topics that maybe weren't, prevalent in 2015 or were just ignored entirely in 2015? And so we've consolidated all of that, and now we're sort of launching this drafting phase where we kind of start writing the plan. There's likely going to be sort of iterative check-ins during that process to kind of get feedback on sort of that working draft. And then I believe the current timeline has a working draft available for public comment sometime next May or June. And then that will be open for 3 months, and a final version. Those comments will be addressed, and then a final version will be released at the end of next year. And if you want to learn more about that, I definitely encourage you to check out the engagecwcb.org website. It kind of has more information about the timing. We post events on there. You can take a survey on sort of what you want to see in the plan. So definitely, if you've never been involved in state water policy and planning before, there really is a window now in which to sort of really shape the next 5 to 7 years through this update process. Kind of touched on this already, but I'll just mention that we held 7 workshops on agriculture alone. We tackled topics everything from groundwater issues on the Eastern Plains to the role of food systems, sort of thinking about how water affects not only ag production, but food systems down the value chain. So thinking about processing and, local food initiatives, and kind of tying in some like broader supply chain initiatives to kind of thinking about water. We had a session on climate change adaptation and mitigation, and opportunities for farmers to participate in potential mitigation opportunities, but also how we work with the ag sector to adapt to changing conditions that we're going to be seeing across the state due to climate change and other natural disasters. And then, various other topics on drought and other issues. We've had a ton of great partners help out with that. And, but we're not done. And so, I think events like tonight, we're continuing to kind of get this information. We're still trying to collect more feedback on this process. And so I definitely don't want to send the message that there isn't more opportunity for that feedback. And kind of pivoting a little bit to the topic for tonight, it's one of the key themes throughout a lot of the scoping has been a discussion on how we kind of make this process more inclusive, more equitable, and to kind of reflect a broader diversity of stakeholders that have maybe historically not part of or have not had the opportunity to participate in that original update or original water planning process, or just really being involved in water policy generally. One of the efforts to begin to address that was the creation of this water equity task force by the Department of Natural Resources. This was convened in March earlier this year. It consists of actually 21, I think, stakeholders, because due to some really great advocacy by a lot of folks on this call, there was an ASECIA position added to that task force. And so, and then several members from these basin roundtables. There's been one meeting to date, and some of the issues that kind of came up during that initial meeting were, things that like, how do we bridge the rural-urban divide? What does rural even mean? There are, a lot of people of color living in urban areas. Sort of how do we talk about that? How do we better deliver the grant program programming that I mentioned. How do we deliver information about this planning process? How do we talk about the role of education and getting younger people more engaged in water issues and making sure that that programming is accessible? Then we talked a lot about roundtable recruitment, and I agree that I think the Basin Roundtables do provide a lot of great services, but they could definitely use some work. They can be not the easiest group of folks to kind of break into, and I think there's a lot of hopefully more discussion around that topic on how we make the roundtables a little bit more open and inclusive with a broader water community. I just did see that there's going to be a meeting on the 31st this month, and I think folks are allowed to kind of tune in to watch that. And then there's going to be a public workshop with this task force, and then a final report with some of the recommendations. And hopefully, this kind of shapes that update process. On urban ag, I would say that we've done a lot, but again, huge kudos. So CWCB worked with this Colorado University of Colorado Boulder Masters of Environment students in 2020. It was an interesting time. Willow can talk about it. I met Willow once in person or twice in person, and then COVID hit and we were all remote, but fantastic job. And one of the capstone events was this urban ag scoping workshop where we talked about sort of defining urban agriculture, talked about some of the challenges facing urban agriculture producers in Colorado, so everything from land access to water affordability to reliance on municipal supply that can be shut off in response to drought and other issues. And then we started talking about solutions, so everything from on-farm infrastructure to working on land access and water issues, and then broader education. Building off that, we did launch a literature review and sort of interview process at CWCB. We are working with Western Resource Advocates and Water Now Alliance to conduct that. We've sort of asked them to see sort of what's the state of the science on sort of the public benefits and ecosystem benefits of urban agriculture. And while that project is still underway, I think there's going to be a final report in August. Some of the findings are pretty promising in terms of particularly water conservation. So we're finding that when you look at community gardens and food production systems in urban areas, they actually use a lot less water than say traditional landscaping like grasses. And so that's one interesting sort of tidbit that we're kind of hopeful to kind of maybe share with our local urban planning partners and municipality partners on that, if we've been kind of incorporating urban agriculture into the way that they sort of develop new developments or other land use planning. Hopefully there's a water conservation benefit there. And then I'll quickly just note that one unique issue that, again, is I think really focused on urban ag is this issue of using water recycling. So this is the process of essentially, we use water, we treat it to a fairly high standard, and then in certain parts of the state, particularly the Front Range, we can reuse that water for additional needs without tapping into other surface water supplies. And so there were some regulations passed, I think 2 years ago, allowing for recycled water to be used for edible crop production and industrial hemp. And to date, we haven't had a project that has actually utilized that, but we're in the process of working with Denver Botanical Gardens, Sprout City Farms, UC Denver, and Denver Water to actually start a demonstration project, I hope by the end of this year, to kind of start kind of understanding, what are the benefits of this approach. And so stay tuned on that too, but I think that's incredibly exciting and could be really interesting tool to help address some of these water access and affordability issues as well. I won't spend a ton of time. I'll be happy to answer questions, but again, yeah, we love engagement. Definitely, I'll definitely share my contact information. Always feel free to submit feedback to us. Always happy to do one-on-one engagement. Definitely get involved in those roundtables, and then again, check out that website for more information about this process. So I think that's all I have. I'm happy to answer some questions, and sorry if I went over a little bit there.
That's okay. Thanks, Alex. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll make sure they get answered. But I have a couple questions to kick us off. So not all urban producers are in the metro, Denver metro area and along the Front Range, but a lot are. And there's a Metro Basin Roundtable. Can you tell us a little bit about that roundtable and how that could elevate the voices of urban producers in the water plan?
Sure, Erin. Yeah, and so so there are 9 basin roundtables. Each of them represent one of our major basins in the state, and then there's the Metro Roundtable. The Metro Roundtable is a little unique in that it covers essentially the Denver metro area, and yeah, I mean, I think we looked at their BIP from our basin implementation plan, and it did not mention urban agriculture. So I do think there is an opportunity there. The ag rep that sits on the metro is currently Robert Sakata. He is a farmer in the Brighton area, also happens to be a South Platte board member for CWCB. But long story short, I don't think urban ag is very well represented on the Metro Roundtable. And then there were other roundtables, while they cover major urban areas like Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. The ag reps on each of those. The weird thing about the roundtables is that there's an ag rep position, but that one person doesn't necessarily represent urban ag, or is that it's not necessarily reflected in that position. I would say they typically are larger commercial scale producers. And so I think, long story short, given the extent and sort of interest in urban farming, particularly along the Front Range, I think there is value in definitely working with those, the South Platte, Metro, and ARC roundtables in particular on kind of weaving in some of these opportunities in the update.
Thanks, Alex. And if people wanted to get involved with those, how would they go about getting involved with the Metro Roundtable or the other ones that you mentioned?
So each of the roundtables does have a website. So if you Google South Platte Basin Roundtable or Metro Basin Roundtable, they have a joint website, I believe, that pops up, and that has all of their information in terms of their meeting times and contact information. And then our website, so cwcb.org, also has a roundtables like landing page with contact information and information about each of the roundtables. So both of those websites can definitely connect you. And I would say, I think for the most part, most of them are still meeting virtually or offering hybrid options. And so it is slightly easier to get more engaged in the roundtables. I have a lot of mixed feelings on this, but it is easier than it had been where they were all in person, and now they are offering more opportunities for engagement. So it is a good time to kind of at least check out what they're talking about and see if there's opportunity to get more engaged.
Great, thanks, Alex. Well, how am I on time? Do we have time for one more question for Alex?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, I've got one more question for you. Just about, you went over those solutions that came out of the urban ag scoping workshop. So what levers do you see in the water plan that could help deliver on some of those solutions that we should look to in this next drafting and finalization phase of the water plan?
Well, I definitely recommend reaching out to staff that are writing the water plan. If you go to that Engage CWCB website, it does link to the contact information for each of the staff that are directly involved in drafting the water plan. And it's being done by sort of topic area. And so I would say that that's a really good starting point for not only kind of learning more about the update process and the water plan, but just kind of getting a sense of who's working on it. And I would say that we're a pretty small agency, so direct email to those folks is pretty responsive. You will, I think, get a response. I think it's probably the most direct way. And then I would say in that email, request that you might want a presentation or opportunity to present or offer more information. And then I think we're always open well before this public comment deadline next winter or next summer. Definitely feel free if you have ideas or recommendations or promising projects or programs you want to share with staff. You just feel free to pepper us with those. I'm sure they'll all get mad at me for saying that, but really, I would I would certainly recommend not to wait until next summer to comment on this process. I think the cake might be a little baked at that point. So I would definitely encourage you all to kind of, if you do have any ideas on how to kind of address some of these issues, I'd say kind of really start reaching out to staff now as this drafting gets underway. And I think that will be hopefully a more direct opportunity to sort of shape that final product that comes out next year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alex. That was really helpful. That was a ton of information. Can we share your slides? There's just a lot of helpful resources.
Oh, absolutely. I'll share this. No problem.
Okay, cool. We'll send them out to folks after the webinar is over. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Much thanks to Alex for being here and sharing all that. So we're still going to be talking about state government and how state government can address urban ag and water issues, but we're going to hear from Commissioner Kate Greenberg now. So Kate leads the Department of Ag for Colorado. I've also had the pleasure of working with Kate before she was at the department. So very glad that she can be here. She's been a water leader and an ag leader for a long time. So yeah, Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Erin. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, great. Fantastic. Well, it's great being with you all tonight. Thanks again for the invitation to be here. And I kind of want to talk about, kind of three different buckets. The first one, I just want to specifically touch on our direct engagement on the urban ag side. Second is giving a recap of this last legislative session because it will touch everybody in ag. And then thirdly, kind of looping back on soil water stewardship and market opportunity and kind of how we're trying to draw all those together. So starting out on, and I'll pull up a presentation here in a second, but sort of the background on our engagement with urban agriculture. The department has not specifically engaged with urban producers through our program areas. We have ad hoc, sort of as we have relationships engaged with urban producers, but we're really trying to formalize our ability to support you all who are farming and raising food in an urban setting. So one of the irons we have in the fire right now, we have a 5-year partnership with NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, that allowed us to hire one of 6 positions. There's actually many more than that in our conservation districts, but 6 new positions, one of which we already hired. That's Ryan Taylor, who's running our soil health program with Cindy Lair. Another position that now with stimulus funds we hope to be able to fund because we needed a match is an urban ag specialist. So we actually worked with NRCS to line out that specifically in our agreement, knowing that's a gap that we have as an agency and something both of us as CDA and NRCS want to fill. So we are hopeful that we are now able to move forward in that regards. We're also looking at potential collaboration in urban areas with a lot of our soil and conservation work. I had a lot of conversations, and I believe my team is moving forward with Denver Botanic Gardens on a partnership there. And we are also looking at how we do outreach and stakeholder engagement in urban areas in ways that we've never considered before. So that's kind of a background of where we are at. I feel like we're very much at the beginning of figuring out what our tools are for explicitly engaging urban producers. There's never been a reason that you can't be involved with the Department of Ag, but we've never had an explicit sort of strategy for how we reach you and the particular needs you have in an urban setting. So let me share my screen right now and move on to just a quick kind of overview of what we have going on. And actually, I have to find there we go. Find the share button real quick. So this legislative session was a busy session, and this, this will be a kind of a laundry list, but I hope you all take away that, a lot of what we're fighting for and advocating for is meant to serve urban producers just as much as rural. But this past legislative session, we actually got $76 million in stimulus funding for agriculture alone. That's in addition to, I think, Alex, about the $130 million DNR got. That's to support water, forest health, watershed management, other critical components that impact agriculture. So we've been preparing for this day since the pandemic hit. We worked with many of you on the Respond and Rebuild Fund with the CARES Act dollars, that initial $2 million of just quick in and out the door emergency funding. This is on top of that, and this comes through the legislative process and the state stimulus money we found. So just, you know, the collaboration we've had over the last year to advocate for these resources, it did not, it was not a given that we were going to receive them, but I think the 76 million shows that folks are behind ag and want to support you, and we're going to be doing that in a variety of ways. So this is a breakdown of our various stimulus items, and I'll just walk through them real quick and hope that you'll take away, you know, what matters to you most in terms of how to engage. We have $2.5 million for a Colorado Proud program, so that's ag marketing, business development, promotion. $3 million for drought relief. We've actually already got $1 million, just a little over $1 million out the door to conservation districts. We have 75 conservation districts in the state, and we don't actually have one in the Denver metro area. So my team did want me to plug that if you are interested in establishing a conservation district, you know, another volunteer opportunity for you farmers out there, my team can work with you, and we'd be more than happy to talk through what that looks like if you are interested. That said, 75 districts, 64 counties, you typically, there is a district within proximity that you can engage with. The margin of that $3 million, we are working through how to spend, but of course, drought is a real deal this year. A lot of producers all across the state, but especially just the entire Western Slope, dealing with the realities of drought in pretty substantial ways. And I know it's not limited to the Western Slope in most years. So we are thinking of this statewide. SB 235, $5 million for ag efficiency, including agrivoltaics and soil health initiatives. And I'll talk a little bit more about soil health in a minute. But really excited about this. Of course, it's one of our priorities, this farmer and rancher-led stewardship. And now cumulatively between those bills, we've got $8 million behind it. This next one is a huge one, and I really want to stress how much we need your input on this loan program. We are going to be standing up a revolving loan fund, a $30 million loan fund. I'm very, very excited about this. It's also a huge task. The fund has sort of two categories. The first one is both grant making and lending for ag infrastructure. So that's processing, storage, grading. Those are kind of all within the definition of infrastructure. The remaining 10 to 20 million is for lending to farmers and ranchers. We won't be direct lending, so we'll be partnering with financial institutions, but the terms of this program will be set out in rule. So like many of the pieces of legislation that came out of this session, rulemaking is when we're really put meat on bone and figure out, you know, what are the terms of the loans. How we have all kinds of flexibility in terms of rate structure, payback periods, what kind of collateral we want to accept, what kind of risk we're willing to accept. We don't have to have the same level of risk tolerance as a traditional financial institution. So this is a huge opportunity for us to really make a difference in some really meaningful ways in the state. And lastly, our last stimulus bill this session was $35.5 million for ag events. 28.5 of that is for the National Western Stock Show, $5 million for the Colorado State Fair, and then $2 million for county fairs and other ag events. And we're just finalizing exactly how we're going to get that $2 million out the door and what eligibility will look like. So on top of stimulus funding, we had agenda bills. So each agency at the state, puts forward each legislative session bills that we want to run. Of course, you get bills that come in from bill sponsors. You get bills that come in from lobbyists, from organizations, from citizens who want to see legislation changed. These two here are the ones that we put forward. And you'll see they're related. We're thinking a lot about resilience. We're thinking a lot about climate and the impacts of climate. So the first one, invasive pest control. This it sounds a little wonky, but we do a lot of work with county governments and ag associations to respond to pest outbreaks. So this bill, which was signed by the governor, allows us to, it creates an emergency fund for us to do that response. It sort of updates the definition of that statute with model legislation and allows us to recover our costs. But we know that pest outbreaks are going to likely become more and more frequent with climate change, and we want to be ready to respond. The second bill is the Agricultural Drought and Climate Resilience Office. This is a brand new office at the Department of Ag. This is a bill we put forward because we really don't have a structure to be able to support producers explicitly on climate and on drought. Actually, we have a conservation division, and that's where my team has really picked up so much extra work in our soil health program, public lands engagement, climate work, water, but that's not their full-time jobs. That's not what we have traditionally had capacity for. So this office will have one full-time person, at least as of now, running this office, and it's all about voluntary, incentive-based solutions to drought and climate. So for urban producers in particular, you are absolutely a part of this equation of how we build resilience, of how we tackle these issues that are really coming to a head in a lot of ways, although, I think we're going to see a lot more tough times ahead. And we've got to have both the structure, the research, the dollars, the people, the assistance in place to get creative and get serious about doing this work. A few other bills. Some of these probably don't make too much difference, but we do oversee the wine board. So we worked on some winery legislation. HB 1181 was a big one. I think many of you were engaged on the soil health program. This, of course, aligns with our Drought and Climate Resilience Office and enables us explicitly in statute to be able to do this voluntary incentive-based soil health work. So we are very excited about that. And then SB 87, the Ag Workers' Rights, we are going to be doing rulemaking. So just to remind folks, Department of Labor has the bulk of the rulemaking responsibility for that bill. We will be doing rulemaking around hand weeding exemptions. So the bill prohibits the use of the short-handled hoe. So that's important for you all to know if you are using that tool on your operations, as many urban farms are often hand tools. The other limit is that workers cannot spend more than 20% of their time on hand weeding without a variance. So we'll be setting up through rule the variance program for producers to be able to seek an exemption essentially from that limit. Just a few more slides. We also oversee animal health and welfare regulatory programs with the department. So these first two bills really are an effort to offer greater protections to pet animals in the state. The third one, 135, prohibits use of certain animals, in particular exotic animals, in traveling animal acts. That's another place we'll be working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on implementing that new law and ensuring compliance. And then lastly, and before I talk about my last point, I just want to mention stakeholder engagement. It really, your voice and your input really do matter. I was just looking over today, all of the stakeholder meetings my team has held so far just for stimulus alone. We had another one on SB 87 this morning. They keep notes, they reference those notes. When we start the formal rulemaking process for some of these, like the loan program, SB 87, your comments will become part of a formal record if you are there at those formal meetings. So I just really want to encourage you that, these stakeholder sessions make a difference to the outcome, and showing up makes a difference. So that's true for just these informal listening sessions that we do and the formal rulemaking. The way to engage with those is best through our website. So if you get on our newsletter, if you just go to ag.colorado.gov, at the very bottom, you sign up for our newsletter. That's when you get all the e-blasts. I write a bunch of them. My team writes a bunch. Those are the people doing the work who are writing those emails to you. And of course, social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we're on all of those. So please do follow us there. And my info, well, I guess that's our generic info. My info is kate.greenberg@state.co.us. And you can reach out anytime. I'm going to stop sharing, and I just have one kind of final point to make, and then open it up for questions. But, there's a lot going on. There's dollars flowing like we've never seen before. That was an incredibly busy legislative session. We're in this drought that is tugging on all sides of the state. Just because the West Slope is the deep red on the drought monitor doesn't mean the East Slope isn't feeling the impact, because we share water, and half of Denver's water comes from the Western Slope. I was just with, actually this morning, Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, Governor Polis, and Congresswoman DeGette, talking about how critical a state we're in when it comes to drought, and how critical agriculture is to tackling the issues we face. And that opinion is shared at the state level, at the federal level, and of course at the local level. And there was a lot of discussion about how we make sure that tribes are also a part of that as sovereign governments with huge stake in our water future. So with that, we are very focused on breaking down silos. We're doing our stewardship work with our soil health program, our STAR pilot, where we're engaging conservation districts and producers in developing a essentially voluntary system of ranking your soil health practices in sort of a regenerative quasi-certification model, and bringing in supply chain partners who will actually pay a premium and value that stewardship. So I think for urban producers, there are going to be so many ways to engage there. We know we can't do this work of stewardship if we aren't doing the work of the bottom line, and really finding ways to develop and help mature markets that incentivize the kind of stewardship we need to tackle what we have before us. So with that, you guys are getting a lot of info tonight. I'm happy to take any questions, and certainly available after this event as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing that. There's a lot going on at the department. So if folks have questions, put them in the chat. I think one thing that you mentioned that people will be really interested in here is that urban ag specialist. Can you say a little bit more about that position? What does that look like? How would a producer work with them?
Great question. We don't know the answers yet to those questions. And honestly, if you guys have needs, just like Alex was saying, just email them to me or to Cindy Lair would be the best. Cindy, maybe we can put her email in the chat, cindy.lair@state.co.us. She'll be writing the job description, and I think we're going to want to know what we put in that description so that the person we hire can best meet your needs. When we do hire them, they will be a employee of the state, so then you'll always be able to use that same email, configuration with whoever we hire to find them. And of course, we will help get them introduced to you all and make sure they are connected.
Great, thanks. I'm sure folks here will have thoughts on what that position could do. So the contact information for Kate and for Cindy is in that chat there. Willow shared it. So similarly, you mentioned about the conservation districts. There isn't one in the Denver metro area, but they provide a lot of technical assistance to producers. So where would someone go? Where would an urban producer go to get that type of technical assistance?
Yeah, good question. You can always reach out to a district outside of your area, and you can find those districts on our website. They're sort of entities of us. Extension is often a place you can go, and Extension does have some good urban ag programs popping up, and it just depends on what you're looking for and who you're looking for, and if you work well with that person and sort of that structure. And then there are, other technical assistance organizations in the private world that, or nonprofit world that are certainly out there to help support you in growing and developing your own business. Oh, and I should mention too, we also have a business development branch of our marketing division. We have a podcast. We do, we can do one-on-one work. We can help get you connected with markets. So if you have any questions about, market access, promoting your business, what to do next in terms of growth, you can reach out to our markets team. Danielle Trotta is the head of Colorado Proud and is now finishing the hiring search to backfill her position in the business side. And they're great resources for just kind of bouncing your ideas off of.
Thanks, Kate. I'm glad you mentioned the market division. I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about how you see those marketing programs, like how could a producer use that if they want to conserve water and use that as a tool for their on-farm water management. Is the department thinking about that at all for the market programs?
Yeah, we actually have a goal of recruiting at least three companies in the next year who will pay a premium to our producers participating in the STAR pilot. And that's the way we're like, we don't want to be the government intervener forever, right? We want to help cultivate a marketplace that incentivizes stewardship in a brand new way for the future. And so that's, participating in STAR is a great place to start. Just email Cindy Lair and she will get you connected. We're just in the pre-pilot phase, which means we're working with about 25 producers and 4 conservation districts to help us set up the framework for this ranking system in all different kinds of cropping systems. So I'll bet you we're not ready to understand how to do this for urban production. So that will probably be a gap we're going to fill. Then, beyond that, I think other ways to engage, we do a lot of Colorado Proud consumer surveys. And we have found that by far, consumers are much more likely to buy. There's great brand recognition with the Colorado Proud label. So consumers are much more interested in purchasing those products because of that brand recognition, because they care about Colorado Proud. Colorado Proud is a free program. It's not perfect. We're thinking about always how to make it better. But that said, the consumer and brand recognition is a great entry point to developing new business. And then our market team actually can do business development for businesses. We take individual businesses on trade missions. We're really focusing on local food system development and diversification, and especially how do we tie this water short future in with agricultural production in a way that has a viable marketplace. So all of that, there's opportunity with urban production to be sure.
That's a lot to chew on. So this feels like a bad time to transition, but I think we are out of time and I want to make sure that we get to Amanda Weaver, but we'll have some more time to talk about this all together as a group. So thanks so much, Kate. I'm sure we'll have some more questions for you after Amanda, but now we'll transition and hear from Amanda Weaver. Amanda's going to give us the producer perspective on this. She's the owner and operator of 5 Fridges Farm and is also an instructor at CU Denver at the Geography and Environmental Sciences Department. So I will turn it over to Amanda.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to just give a shout out to the conservation districts. I work quite a bit with the Jefferson Conservation District, so reaching out to the nearest conservation district is really important. And I would love to see a conservation district be created in the Denver area because it's been extremely helpful for me as an urban producer. And with that, I'm going to drill down really specifically into how urban users use water. And so I'll be talking about both water rights and domestic water. And so I think I think it was my job on this panel to get really specific about how water is used in the urban environment. And I think a lot of times that people have this idea or this misconception that all farmers, whether they're urban or they're rural, that we all have access to this mythical water right. And that's not actually the case. Most urban producers are not using water rights or adjudicated rights for their water. They're using domestic water. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time at my farm. I have a 13-acre farm out here in Wheat Ridge, which is about 7 miles from downtown Denver. And for the last 10 years, I use both my water rights and domestic water side by side. And I just want to kind of give a little bit of a comparison because I think it really highlights some of the differences that we deal with in the urban environment regarding water. So as I said, most urban producers, they're working at a scale where they're either they don't have physical access to a well or a ditch. But also water rights, I think there's a perception that you become a farmer and water rights, somebody just knocks on your door and says, would you like to buy some water rights or rent them? And they're actually very, very hard to get unless you happen to have bought a property that maybe had water rights associated with it. But even then, it's very, very difficult. So one doesn't decide to go into farming and then automatically the water right ferry comes and delivers you some water rights. So again, most of us end up having to use domestic water. But for those people who do have ditches in the city and access to water rights, I just want to sort of give a little bit of perspective on what that's like as an urban user, because we have both in Boulder and in Denver and all over the Front Range, there are series of ditches that some urban people think are creeks, and all sorts of issues there that I'll talk about in a second. But there's an infrastructure issue of this ditch system, and if you have access to either well water or ditch water, one of the issues is physically getting it out of the ground, pumping it out of the ground, and then oftentimes it's very, very silty. So unlike a domestic water system, you can't just turn it on. You actually have to create pressure, and then you have to put it through some sort of system that isn't going to get all mucked up with the silt. So those high efficiency drippers that we all like to use for growing, they don't work very well with ditch water. So while everyone sort of feels like ditch water would be this wonderful thing, oftentimes with a lot of the higher efficiency watering that we're doing, it's really not that efficient. And ironically, over the years, I've spent more money in gas running the pump to pull the water, to then filter the water, to then push it through the system, than I do on the domestic water. So it's a really interesting quandary of it'd be great to have water rights, but do we really want it? And is that a good thing in the urban environment? The last thing is the infrastructure of those ditches is really in jeopardy. As we do more infill, as we develop the urban environment, a lot of those ditches get covered up. A lot of people don't know what those ditches are. And so it becomes a harder and harder. I can give you many examples of my small mile-long ditch here in Wheat Ridge. It has to take so many turns and dip under streets that much of the momentum of the ditch water that was created 100 years ago is no longer there. And so in many ways, I really believe that the future of ditch water and urban water rights is the days are probably numbered with all of the things that we're doing. So on the other side of that is domestic water, and that's what most of us end up using. And I just want to quickly clarify what domestic water is, so we all have a shared definition of it. That's the tap water that you use. So it's treated water. And if you live in Denver, Denver Water is the server of that water. But there are actually hundreds of different water administrators through the Front Range. Mine happens to be consolidated water. And domestic is great, right? I can just turn on the pump, or excuse me, I can turn on the faucet and it creates pressure, and it's clean, and I can run it through the water through my sprinkler system, and it's great. However, the things that we don't think about as urban producers, there's a couple issues. The big one is cost, and so many of you who are doing smaller productions are probably seeing your water costs sometimes double. In the summer, I have a cost out here when watering 3 to 4 acres, upwards of $600 a month, or if not higher than that. So again, this is something that people don't often realize in the urban environment. I think there's an assumption that, oh, hey, if you're a producer, you somehow get a break on water because we're growing food and doing all those good things. And yet we're paying the same price that everybody pays. And so I think there's some issues there to be discussed around, if you're an urban producer, can we discuss this concept of using domestic water for urban production? But there are also infrastructural issues. This last year, I had the experience of having to put in a commercial backflow. And a commercial backflow is something that's required on commercial buildings like an apartment building, and it's a health code that, or excuse me, a health regulation that came down from the state and was administered by the local water administrators. And essentially, producers were identified, small and large, and they had to put in this $3,000 to $5,000 thing to mitigate a health issue. And I probably don't need to say this to anyone in the chat room here, but that's a lot of money to a small scale producer, right? That might be as much as one makes in a summer, as far as their depending on the scale that they're doing their production. So I give you these examples because I think there's a lot of things that affect urban producers that we don't necessarily close the loops on. We know about them in theory, but we don't necessarily have the loops closed on these experiences. And certainly in my case, and I know in conversations I've had with Fatima and others in urban farming, is that, am I liaisoning with my city officials? Am I liaisoning with my state officials? Am I liaisoning with my county officials? And many times you're dealing with all three, and everybody comes back and says, oh, we didn't think about urban producers and all of this. And so I would really, really love to see more connection. And it might be through some of these roundtables and different things. But what I'm beginning to see now as an urban producer for about 10 years is that there are some very, very specific things that make urban producers. And it has to do with dealing with these pieces of infrastructure that we don't know we're going to face, and then all of a sudden someone knocks on our door, and you feel like saying, but I grow food, but I sell local organic food. Isn't that an important thing? You know, I like to wear my Young Farmer t-shirt that says farming is public service. And so I think there's some really great conversations yet to be had on how we think about water, because I don't think, if I weren't even in the middle of it, I'm not sure that most urban people make the connection between going to a farmer's market and there possibly being 5 fewer producers because of something like having to install a backflow or the cost of water. I did an interesting study with some students this last spring, and we found that the water prices are different a mile away from different districts sometimes. And that's fascinating to me. And not one district has agricultural urban pricing for domestic water. And many of the answers that I got upon calling some of the water administrators were, well, we didn't know people were producing with this water. And that's not really our problem. We're in the business of urban water. And that's a totally fair statement. But I think you all can see that there are many, right? There are many holes in that of like, okay, well, how do we start to have this conversation, and who do we have this conversation with? Is it a city conversation? Is it a regional conversation? Is it a state conversation? And I'm still trying to figure that out. I've spoken with many city councilors and planning commission members, and still trying to work out where the backflow issue lies. But those are some of the experiences that I've had that I was asked to give give very specific examples of how I deal with water in the environment. And so I'm sorry I don't have slides or anything like that, but more for conversation of questions on how do we take the great information that Alex has presented and that Kate has presented and really bring it down to this level that promotes urban production, because there is quite a bit of it and it's very vibrant. But we also know that the price of the produce that we sell is directly based on how much water costs, for lots of different reasons, and how much that infrastructure costs me, because that's the biggest cost I have. So Thanks for letting me air my grievances.
That was great. Thank you, Amanda. No need for slides. That was great to kind of ground us back down and bring us back to the field. There's a question and a comment in the chat. Maybe we'll start with this comment first about the higher pH is a bit problematic for urban producers. I mean, I don't know if that's an issue that's come up for you, but if it is, could you kind of explain what that is and why it's been a problem?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it really depends on each water district and how they're treating the water. Really, more than pH is the chlorine that gets put in water. And that's just something that I think we all deal with. You can let your water sit, but of course, then you've lost the pressure to release some of that chlorine. I don't find that it has a massive impact. I don't know if other producers in here want to talk about their domestic use and if they've seen any particular reaction to either pH or any of the chemicals that are put in. Anybody?
Yeah, Sue here with Ecar Farm. You know, we're out in Lowry, the old Air Force Base, and the site that we're on actually was an old cement depot. So we have like big chunks of concrete all over in the soil, keeps coming up the more we grow. And what we're seeing this year is, you know, there's a lot more lockup of, it's hard for plants to absorb nitrogen and some of the other minerals. So we're trying to figure out if we've got to like lay sulfur. Our soil is a little more alkaline than it was, but I imagine as we continue to use this water, we're going to have more problems. So we're trying to figure out how we, you know, do we have to lay sulfur down? What do we have to do to try to really make it possible for plants to grow in a more alkaline environment? We're not really sure what that means. And for sure, the price is what will put us out of business eventually. Yeah. We're at $800 a month right now. It's a little crazy.
Yeah. And that's on how many acres?
We're on to half an acre of it is community gardens, and an acre and the rest of it's in vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Sue.
It goes to show how variable things can be in urban agriculture, even in really close proximity. Amanda, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say there's another question here for you, so I was going to move to a different question.
Okay. So
this is from Sydney. Is there any access to non-potable water sources that could be used in urban agriculture?
Great question. So this is where we get into the gray water idea, which is great as well. But sorry, that was my timer. It just went off. Part of the issue is like I explained with the ditch water. On a classic rural farm, you would have well water for the house and ditch water that you would use on fields. When you're dealing with a two-system environment, I'm already dealing with both ditch water and domestic water. So I'm running two separate sets of lines, which you can imagine the cost of running one set of irrigation and then the cost of running a whole nother set of irrigation that is pump-based and all of that. So while I would love to do something like that, the idea of introducing yet a third system is really overwhelming to me. And then you get into the issues of who is allowed to have non-potable water in an urban area, right? Because I'm in an incorporated area and you're not allowed to have, like I can't have a composting toilet on my property. Whereas if I had a larger piece outside a city limit, I might be able to do something like that. Non-potable water can have some of those issues as well.
Yeah, Erin, I can talk about that a little bit. And I mean, I guess what we're trying with that recycled water project. So, I mean, Amanda's point's right. I mean, there's purple pipe, domestic pipe, there's a whole separate delivery system. And there are a lot of requirements in which you have to kind of set that up. I think what we're maybe hoping though is that we would transition, if the recycled water is effective for those that do have access to that purple pipe feeding network, that is being built out quite a bit. And then we're also having conversations on actually utilizing the ability to pump, not pump, but fill water at Denver Water's treatment plant at York Street and actually trucking it to dispersed sites around the metro and kind of dumping it in dispersed decentralized tanks. And I think the idea would actually be to swap out domestic use with that new use entirely. And I mean, we're not there yet, but I think the goal would be to sort of slowly transition away from sort of the issues that Amanda brought up that are prevalent with tap water, not to mention just the cost, but some communities, outdoor irrigation, for example, which they often do include food production with, gets shut off first sometimes, or is more regulated when supplies are short. And so I think what they don't do that for recycled water, and recycled water is actually sold at a subsidized rate because they want to get it out the door, and it's available year round. So actually there's this issue where Denver is actually looking for customers in the winter or off season. So if you have like an indoor grow, you could potentially use this. So I'm not saying it solves all the issues that we've talked about here in terms of that infrastructure challenges, but I'm hopeful that it kind of fits some needs potentially that are not current, that are some challenges that are currently being kind of felt by some producers.
And Alex, I think they do. I think it's really fantastic. I think what's hard for people to imagine though is the scale of like the amount of water that Sue and I are dealing with on an acre plus is right. Picture what that tank would look like, right? For 3 acre feet. And it's hard for people to even imagine. I mean, I'd love to have that trucked out if you want to truck that out.
I know there's something like a business opportunity. Anyway, I do understand that scale issue for sure.
Definitely for smaller scale, it's a great answer.
This is great. I feel like we're already moving into the full panel discussion. So I think we can open up all these next questions to all the panelists. I think one to kind of tie everything together that Willow put in the chat was how could the CWCB grants, the CDA grant and loan program, how could those connect with to help address that cost of water for urban farmers, or some of those other issues that you brought up, Amanda, that urban producers are dealing with? How do we take those programs and apply it to the challenges on the urban farm?
I'm happy to take the CWCB side real fast. I guess, so typically, I'll just say right off the bat that typically our grant programs don't fund, I guess, individual producers. We tend to fund larger, I guess, more programmatic scale projects. I would certainly reach out to your local NRCS office, or look at things like or Environmental Quality Incentives Program or USDA program, if you're talking about like on-farm, specifically infrastructure. That said, I'll just use the backflow as an example. I mean, if there were a project proposal that, say, wanted to help offset the cost of backflow devices for the city of Wheat Ridge for producers, that could be awarded. That could be one of our grants, especially if there were some other education and outreach elements attached to it. So those are the types of things that I think we could fund. But I would also say, going back to the water plan, we can also just point out that maybe we do need to offer, some more assistance or sort of, tiered rates for producers. So I would go even the policy route too. And that's sort of the bridge that we sort of kind of balance is we want to fund projects, but we're also interested in actually like pushing and being advocate to change some of these policy issues as much as we can, get a local community or municipality to kind of think about that. So
I'll give you a call, Alex. We'll get that going.
Sounds good.
Kate, did you want to add anything to that about the CDA programs?
Yeah, so really stimulus has changed the ballgame for us, because prior to that we're really limited to the technical assistance we can provide and not the dollars. That said, we do have team members who are so accessible. Like, you can pick up the phone and call, just like Alex said. We've got just incredible depth of knowledge and passion. People want to figure out how to fix problems on our team. I think that's, dollars or not, that's an asset that we will never be without because we've just got an amazing crew. That said, I mentioned the loan program. We're actually working with CWCB about how we can sort of synergize our financial tools in that way, in a way that, is the sum is greater than the whole of its parts on this front. And again, there's so much that we don't yet know about how that loan fund and the grant portion of it is going to operate. It's hard for me to say exactly what kind of resources are available, except that there's $30 million will be getting out the door. And so I would just encourage folks to keep tabs on this and join our stakeholder meetings. I mentioned our business development. That's not necessarily explicitly around water, but we've got problem solvers on that team who will just go to bat to figure out how to solve problems. And then again, the conservation districts usually don't have funding, but they have a network. So that's just to say, if you're looking for big bucks, CWCB is where it's at. If you're looking for, adding to the mix of people who are really trying to problem solve, that's us. But that said, we do have a lot of services and now significant funding that if it doesn't help address the water challenges you're facing directly, hopefully we can help be part of the solution for your bottom line and help be problem solvers for, the challenges that you're facing.
Andrew's got sort of a related question in here directed towards Alex, but I think all three of you have things to say on this. I'm going to that overall bottom line. There's a lot of challenges that urban producers are facing with land access, housing and land costs that are written off as non-water issues. So how is CWCB or CDA, or Amanda, how do you think these could be all incorporated together, these non-water urban issues into the water plan update?
I'll take it. I think what you've heard presented from Alex and Kate is really, really a step forward, right? The water plan hasn't acknowledged urban producers in the past, and that's huge. That's huge that we're starting to be part of the conversation. And the fact that Kate's hiring a full-time urban ag specialist, right? That's someone that I didn't have to call last year when I was required to put in this backflow and say, wow, did anybody know about this? Is there a loan or something I can get? Like have these places talked to each other? And I think that was what I found, was that there were no people in these offices that were dealing specifically with urban agriculture. So I think what you've heard tonight is this giant step forward in some of the loopholes that I discussed. And I think they're going to continue to close as people acknowledge that urban production is a real thing.
I think just to add on to that question, and this is again a plug for Alex and the work they're doing with the water plan update, is, Alex, you even mentioned thinking about food systems as part of the water plan, right? And thinking about sort of these challenges at a systems level. And I think in the first iteration of the water plan, it's always hard to figure out how do you break down a topic this immense and this complex into digestible pieces. And the first iteration, which is a very traditional way of looking at our water sort of system, is, agriculture, municipal and industrial, and environmental, right? And as urban producers, you have to figure out where you fit in there, and it's probably just the ag bucket, right? But that's not really the focus. But I think what I've seen staff at CWCB and Alex and folks do is really think about more nuanced ways of sort of breaking down those categories and creating a systems approach, a more complex, approach to how we plan for this, because really to the point in the chat, it is all so connected. And I think it's an incredible challenge to, in policy making, build those connections in a way that reflects the complexity of the issue without being so complex we can't do anything about our plan. And I think that's actually a huge challenge, and maybe you can speak to that, Alex, but a huge challenge on our plates, especially CWCB, and taking this input, reflecting that complexity, but making it digestible and actionable in a way that, those non-water issues are reflected in the realities we're facing around water and aridity in the West.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this. I think we are seeing a lot of opportunities where there is some nexus, particularly in the land use planning and water use planning space. So there was a big push in the original water plan to, I'm going to get the number wrong, it's late, but I want to say it's like 75% of like new Coloradans or new developments to sort of incorporate sort of water smart planning in terms of land use development. And I think part of the onus behind the urban ag research work that we're doing with Western Research Advocates is sort of looking at that nexus in more detail and sort of where urban ag fits in that space. There's been a lot of literature, for example, on sort of the green infrastructure benefits that urban ag provides. A lot of that research has been sort of more on the eastern side of the country, kind of looking at, water quality improvements and sort of citing of urban ag to address issues around like Chesapeake Bay, like health issues. But out west, there's actually a pretty sparse, set of research around that. But I think what we are finding based on some work with Aurora, and there's actually this group called Boundless Landscapes. I want to say they're in like Boulder, but they're actually in the process of basically converting turf in like new development to like raised beds and community gardens and sort of these like just like new landscape options that I think developers are interested in, potentially help use less water. They're, I think, honestly a better public use of space than turf. And so I think there's a lot of conversation right now about this in particular. So Las Vegas, for example, just banned all non-essential turf within urban limits. So anything that was only stepped on for like mowing, for example, is going to be out of there. And I think we could look at some like alternative uses for that. So so that's one example. And I think that could potentially kind of create, we kind of have that information that shows that those results are, achievable. I think some local communities are kind of looking at their options in terms of water conservation and how they kind of reduce their footprint. That could be an interesting tool. And then I'll just broadly say that I think we're looking at even beyond just the urban space, but our peri-urban and sort of urban adjacent farmland too. I mean, we have some of our most productive farmland in terms of food and fat production in the South Platte, sort of river corridor, and it's rapidly being developed. I mean, we're losing it at a very alarming rate, and I would say that it is a water issue because that those irrigated farms provide a lot of public benefits, community benefits, and can help address a number of different needs. And so I would say all these issues, Andrew, urbanization to rising land costs, issues around kind of like how we development trends in the future. I really think there is a really solid water nexus there that I'm excited to work on, and hope to kind of continue to demonstrate that we can kind of think about how these sort of systems work in tandem.
Thanks, Alex. I want to wrap us up with just one more question to take us out. I want to zoom out a little bit and think about how urban producers are situated within the whole state water system, because it's all connected through our water policies, but also just through our waterways. So I'm curious if you have any final thoughts just on how urban producers and rural producers can relate. Are there tensions there, or is there common ground that those two industries can find through water planning?
I think that's a really important question, Erin, and especially the part about through water planning, right? Because as you were asking the question, I was like, yeah, through like marketing and tourism promotion and, getting people to care about the, protecting ag land and et cetera. But through water, I think it's kind of the same, along the same lines, that our system is so integrated that when one basin gets tugged on, like when the water system gets tugged on, it sort of tugs on the rest of the system. And that is also true with public perception around agriculture, that kind of when public perception moves in one way, it kind of tugs on the rest of the agricultural community in various ways, not always in the same direction, but just to say that like we are all kind of connected through this sort of fascial system, fascial, like body fascia, not like, yeah, anyways, like this web of tissue connecting us, right? And I think that is going to be ever more important as we move forward. I mean, to Alex's point about urban water planning or sort of development planning and how we manage our values here, how we plan for our values. All of this comes back to what do we want the state of Colorado to be, right? And we have real decisions on the horizon, not all of which are just in the hands of voters or consumers, but voters and consumers make up the bulk of, a lot of the decisions that are made here and a lot of the pressure that's put on decision makers. So I think finding that connection for shared love of land, for shared love of the work, and acknowledgement of how integrated our systems are, even when they look so different, we're all so dependent on each other. That's going to be ever more critical for ag to remain, a driver of who we are as a state.
I guess I'll just briefly say that every farmer I've met, rural or urban, is extremely passionate about water issues in particular, maybe more so than others, because I think they really do see the value in that. I mean, without it, it's tough to farm here. We're a semi-arid state, and I feel like, especially what we're kind of seeing this year with sort of really scary lowest flows we've seen on some western rivers like the Dolores and the Yampa, and anyway, I feel like that's a common thread through a lot of farmers in the state, is that water is this really crucial resource, and what we're seeing in terms of climate change and some of these other sort of new normals is really kind of changing how these water systems operate, when they've compared in the past, and it's really time now to adopt stewardship strategies and on the farm strategies that can help mitigate that and even take advantage of it. So I would say that I think a lot of farmers are kind of seeing that and sensing that, and are interested in kind of taking an active role and to address those issues.
I would just echo both of those comments. Urban farming and rural farming, while different, have more similarities than they have differences. And I think the care and the love of the land and all of these pieces are the thing that really holds us together as a community, as a farming community. And so I'd like to think we have more in common than not.
Well, I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thanks so much to our panelists for being here, Amanda, for sharing your perspective as an urban producer and some of the challenges you're dealing with, and Alex for telling us how to get involved with the water plan, and Kate for sharing about what's happening at CDA. It's exciting to see that there's some improvements coming down in both departments. So thank you all for being here. To our attendees as well. There's a lot of resources that were shared here, so we'll be sending that out to all the participants. So you'll get the slides if we have them, the recording, and some of the resources that were shared. If you want to get involved with the Water and Equity Partnership, or you want to get involved with the CWCB engagement opportunities, we'll be posting that all on our website. We have a new website, so Willow, I think, put that in the chat, or we'll put that in the chat. You can go there to find out about more events that are coming up, and to get links to those engagement opportunities with CWCB. And we'll send more information about dates that are coming up from Alex to get involved with CWCB. So Will, if you want to put that website link in the chat so people just have that before we go. I think that's all we have to leave you with. If you have any questions, you can also contact Willow. She's the coordinator of the Water and Equity Partnership. So if you have any questions about what came up tonight, want to learn more, want to get more involved, she has her email in the chat. So we'll be in touch to share out this information. And thank you all for being here tonight on a long, hot day. Appreciate you taking the time. Have a good night.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks all.